I got a question for you. Why are you watching? There's no bowl game or championship anywhere close to the outcome of this game of losers. Missouri on a one-season losing streak, Arkansas on a multi-season losing streak. The Razorback losses are well documented. Like it or not, we've become the SEC's cupcake. And yet, I'm now finding I want to be there when we turn this ship around. I want to see the moment when the spark returns of what was once a prideful program. I want to see if War Memorial Stadium still has the magic. Because I saw it happen in the 70s and 80s. I saw Houston Nutt beat Kentucky there and proclaim 1998 as the year of the Arkansas comeback. There were two Miracle on Markhams, and one of those beat the godlike Nick Saban. I want to see how the younger players do, if they show more commitment and spirit. I want to see if a homegrown coach, though an interim, can produce a more energetic performance than the out-of-state coaches of the last 12 years. Come on, Hogs. Play fast, play strong, play Razorback. There is nothing to this game, I know, but it means everything.